We're going to talk about the issue of Texas in the Mexican War. And Texas was an interesting territory, and we're going to tell you how it originates with our first subtopic, which is settlers move into Texas.
What year?
I'll get into that. Now, here's the difference. Who owns Texas? Mexico, not the United States. Remember the Louisiana Purchase? Covered this area here. Did not include Texas, which was Mexican property. Okay? Well, in 1820, a fellow by the name of Moses Austin received permission from Mexico to start a colony in what is now the state of Texas. Okay? People are wanting to move westward. Okay? And so in 1820, Moses Austin receives permission from Mexico to start a colony in what now we know as Texas. Now there was, this for that, because the Mexican government granted Austin permission to bring a few hundred families to the area to settle. However, the people would have to become loyal Spanish subjects. So they would be under Mexican rule. Okay? So, wanting to settle this area we know as Texas, in 1820, Moses Austin received permission from Mexico to start a colony, what is now in the state of Texas. When you have a colony, that means you're settling areas that do not belong to you. Okay? But he gave permission. He being Santa Ana, which we'll talk about later. So the Mexican government grants Austin permission to bring in a few hundred families, but in turn they would have to become loyal Spanish subjects. Just like when people settled the British colonies. They were loyal British subjects, right? Now, unfortunately, Moses Austin died in 1821 before he could establish this colony. So unfortunately, Moses Austin dies in 1821 before he can establish this colony in Texas. So his son, Stephen Austin, goes to the Mexican government and he asks if they will renew the permission that was given to his father and let him do what his father was going to do by bringing in a few hundred settlers to establish a colony. So after Moses Austin died in 1821, the same year, the Mexican government gave Stephen Austin, his son, a renewal of the permission that they had given his father, and he'll be the one that will establish this settlement or this colony of Americans in Texas. Now you kind of, in a way, I would not, just bear with this, you kind of had to apply. When you apply for something to get chosen, you're hand-picked. So if I said I'm going to pick five, I'm going to choose 5 of you to go do something, this special project, I would hand-pick you from the group. Well, that's what he did. He hand-picked 300 settlers. More than 300 wanted to come west to Texas, but he hand-picked 300 settlers to travel to Texas. And these 300 settlers chosen by Stephen Austin were referred to as the Old 300, which is on your ID sheet. Okay, the Old 300. So Stephen Austin handpicks 300 American settlers to go with him to Texas, which belongs to Mexico, and establish a colony, and these 300 settlers were called the Old 300. Yes?
So it's just 300 people, not 300 families?
300 families. Well, no, that's not true. 300 people. You're right, 300 settlers. That's a good question. Originally, Moses Austin was going to bring in several hundred families. Stephen chose to pick 300 settlers to come in. Okay? Well, as I mentioned, he handpicked these, which told you what? And he liked them, and other people wanted to go. Well, soon after the settlement was put together, the colony was put together, other settlers followed and settled in Texas. And by 1830, there were more than 20,000 Americans that had entered Texas. And it belongs to who? Do you think Mexico, that's what they had in mind when they had this agreement? A few hundred families. Well, you know, 200 families would be maybe 600 or 700 people, right? Well, by 1830, more than 20,000 Americans had decided to come to Texas and settle. And this led to two major issues. What might be an issue that this would cause? Well, they are kind of frustrated, but they've kind of done it to themselves. But what are the issues that come up when all of a sudden you're expecting maybe 600 people and you get 20,000? What is the Mexican government concerned about? What's that? Well, not so much space, it's a big area, but has the Mexican government realized they were basically allowing an American state within Mexico itself? Because Texas belonged to Mexico. They're actually almost allowing an American state to exist. You got 20,000 people all of a sudden there. Way more than they had wanted to come in. So first of all, we're thinking, wait a minute, this isn't working. We've basically let an American state we've let so many people that you could consider an American state inside Mexican territory. What were some of these settlers bringing with them that were illegal to have in the country of Mexico? Slaves. Very good. So many of the settlers of these 20,000 Americans that had entered Texas by 1830, many were Southerners. And what did they bring with them? Slaves. And that was outlawed by the Mexican government. So now not only do they have an American state within Mexican territory, but they also now have slavery going on in their country, which they do not allow. So we got some problems. So, to address those two issues, what did the Mexican government do to address the issues? What did they do to address the fact that so many people were coming in that they almost had an American state within their own country? No, that's a good point. They didn't push them out, but they didn't allow any more in. Okay, so they passed a law that prohibited that no more Americans were coming into Texas. That's how they solved that problem of overcrowding, so to speak, or having an American state within their country. Is they passed a law saying no more settlers to Texas. And what the second thing they do to solve that problem? They said no slaves. They enforced the slavery issue. And anybody that had slaves would have to remove them. Okay? Well, the American settlers in Texas didn't like this, so they protested the new laws. And so the Mexican army had to be sent to Texas to enforce those laws. Okay? So these 20,000 settlers didn't like the new laws that Mexico put up, that no more settlers could come in, and that they would not allow slavery in the Mexican territory that we know as Texas. And because of that, the Mexican army was sent to enforce those laws in Texas. And when you have an army presence in an area in which people aren't agreeing with what you're doing, what's going to eventually break out? Fighting. Very good. And that's going to take us to our next subtopic, which is the fight for independence. All of a sudden, Texas is going to fight for their independence in an area they do not own. Okay? Pretty interesting. So as a result of their differences, 5 major skirmishes between the settlers of Texas and the Mexican government are going to break out. And it seems a little silly because it's not their land. But now it's going to be a fight for independence. Like the American colonies fought for their independence from Great Britain, the settlers of Texas now are going to fight for their independence from Mexico. Okay, and I'm going to tell you about 5 different skirmishes. Yep, the first one, and it's on your sheet, was at Gonzales. It was a fight at Gonzales, and it's on your sheet, so you'll want these sheets in front of you. Okay, the first skirmish was at Gonzales. And this occurred on October 2nd of 1835. October 2nd of 1835 at Gonzales. And it happened at what we know as San Antonio, Texas. And what happened is the commander of a Mexican army tried to seize a cannon away from the people that were settled in San Antonio. So the Mexican army came in and tried to take their cannon, yes?
Did we skip that or
No, that's the ID that goes with it. We haven't got there yet. We're under Gonzales, right? So the fight at Gonzales, this occurred on October 2nd, 1835, when a Mexican commander tried to seize a cannon belonging to settlers at San Antonio. And it was a pretty good little skirmish. The settlers obviously fought back. They didn't want the cannon to be taken. And they actually won that skirmish, which became known as the Lexington of Texas. You won't understand that because we started our lecture after the Revolutionary War, so I'll explain to you. So the first skirmish, Gonzales. The fight occurred on October 2nd, 1835, when a commander of Mexican troops at San Antonio tried to seize their cannon. The settlers fought back, saved their cannon from being taken, and this skirmish became known as the Lexington of Texas. Anybody want to take a shot at that? Why they call it the Lexington of Texas? Why would they call it? Anybody know? I'll bet Mrs. Montoya does. Mrs. Montoya, give it a shot.
The first battle that we had with the British was at Lexington.
In the Revolutionary War was at Lexington. And so the first battle we're going to have with the Mexicans that will lead to the Mexican War happened at Gonzales, therefore was given the nickname Lexington of Texas. First battle we ever fought against the British that led to the Revolutionary War was at Lexington, okay, in Massachusetts. As a result, they called this battle the Lexington of Texas because it will be the first battle that would lead us to a war with Mexico. Yes, dear?
So, who tried to take the cannons? It was the Mexican army.
A commander of Mexican army, yeah. The commander didn't want him to have the cannon. It makes sense. He wanted him to have this big cannon, right? So he tried to take it and didn't get her done. The second skirmish also happened at San Antonio. And American settlers led by Ben Millam defeated a large Mexican force and actually took prisoners of war. So the second skirmish happened in San Antonio when American settlers led by Ben Millam defeated a large Mexican force and took prisoners. No, Battle of San Antonio. But it has a purpose. Now this defeat, along with the defeat at Gonzales, really irritated who? Who? Mexico's emperor, Santa Anna. And because he was so mad about this, he decided it was time to teach the Americans a lesson. He's going to take immediate action against the Americans. And where's this going to happen? At the Alamo. At the Alamo. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about the Alamo. I think everybody's heard Remember the Alamo and whatever. But I'm going to give you the story behind the Alamo because it's an interesting story. Now, what happened after his men were defeated at San Antonio and Gonzales, Santa Anna led a charge into Texas, and his target is going to be an American fort known as the Alamo. That's his target. He's going to teach these American settlers a lesson for bringing arms up against his army. So after the defeat at both Gonzales and San Antonio, Santa Anna, the leader of Texas, Emperor of Mexico, is going to lead a charge, and his target in Texas is going to be an American fort called the Alamo. He's going to lead the army. That's how important this is to him. Okay? And his target's going to be an American fort known as the Alamo. Anybody know what the Alamo actually was? Well, no, what was it?
Was it a fort?
Yeah, it was a fort, but what was it prior to being a fort? Anybody know?
Wasn't it on a rock, like a high?
I can't remember what
It was a Catholic mission. It was a Catholic church, basically. Okay? And they turned it into a fort. So it was a Catholic mission. Now the fort was located across the river from San Antonio, and San Antonio was the main route out of Mexico into Texas. So the fort is located across the river from San Antonio, which was the main route out of Mexico into Texas. So Santa Anna wanted to secure San Antonio. To do that, what did he have to do? Take the Alamo. Now the Alamo at the time was full of military volunteers, which means they were militia led by William Travis. Okay? So at the time, the Alamo was being manned, so to speak, or defended by volunteers or militia led by William Travis. And there were approximately 200 along with their families. So about 200 along with their families. So in the Alamo were approximately 200 militia along with their families. Now, included in those 200 people were a couple of famous names: frontiersman James Bowie and former Congressman Davy Crockett.
I did my paper on this.
Well, do you know about what happens here? Okay. So, included in those 200 people in the Alamo defending that former Catholic mission were frontiersman James Bowie, and former Congressman Davy Crockett. Now, what did James Bowie have with him? You know, of those two. Well, I know, but of those 200 men, some of them were under the command of William Travis, because they're militia, and some of them were under the command of James Bowie, who are militia. So some of the troubles they had early in defending this fort is that Bowie's men would not listen to Travis, and Travis's men wouldn't listen to Bowie. And Jim Bowie was sick during this time, and finally the men got together after a couple of conflicts and said, wait a minute, we only got 200 guys here, we may need to get along. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. Now Davy Crockett simply came out there for a little bit of adventure. He was a congressman, but he got defeated in his last election. It was a little bitter. And there were tales of Davy Crockett, how he could leap, mountains. And there was guys that had put on a show that wasn't him. He became a bit of a celebrity for his coonskin cap and his, frontier tales. Well, he ended up getting elected to Congress. He was kind of like Andrew Jackson, a little bit backwardy, not really a good politician. Well, he gets defeated in his re-election campaign, and he decides he's going to get out of the political life, and he's going to go west. He wants to go to Texas and sees what's going on. And where does he end up? Unfortunately for him, in the Alamo. Okay? Santa Anna had 4,000 men. And for 13 days, they basically harassed the Alamo, waiting for a chance to really attack and get after it. Yep, 13. So, Santa Anna had 4,000 Mexican troops, and they were kind of harassing and sieging at the Alamo for 13 days, hoping to kind of run them out. Well, although they were horribly outnumbered, their job was to defend the Alamo, right? And so they stood fast, they wouldn't abandon, and after 13 days of hassle or harassment with no real results, finally on March 6th of 1835, Mexican forces attacked the fort. Well, the settlers still refused to surrender the fort to the Mexican army, despite their overwhelming odds. And what happened? Anybody know what happened? What happened to all these people inside the Alamo? All the people inside the Alamo were killed, with the exception of wives and children. Couriers were also spared. What were couriers? People that took messages. And there were actually 3 slaves inside the Alamo that were also spared. But everybody else was wiped out to the man. Okay, so after the Mexicans decided to attack, all people inside the Alamo were killed, with the exception of wives and children. Couriers, or messengers, and 3 slaves. 3 slaves were spared. Now, historical documents vary. There were 189 known defenders there that were killed in the attack. The Mexican accounts stated that they had killed 250, but according to military records, 189 known defenders were killed. Now, does that make sense? Because there were couriers and 3 slaves that would be taken out of that 200, so it kind of makes sense. One of the first men to fall was William Travis. He was hit in the head with a 75 caliber musket ball. It was not a good sight. And James Bowie, if you listen to legend, he was so sick he was bedridden, was he not, Haley? Do you remember that? What did it say in there? Remember, he was bedridden, and supposedly they came in and killed him while he was bedridden. Okay, and he had the big Bowie knife that he was trying to defend himself with. Who knows? You know what I mean? There wasn't anybody to witness that. But James Bowie was killed without question. Davy Crockett was killed without question. And William Travis along with the others. Now, if you're interested in watching this, it's kind of true. If you watch the movie The Alamo with Billy Bob Thornton playing Davy Crockett, it's not bad. It's not a bad dramatization of what happened. Okay, but anyway, it was not good.